Hi and welcome to our third mini lecture on motivation theories. This mini lecture will be focusing on reinforcement theories of motivation. Reinforcement theories view human behaviour as determined by their environmental consequences. So it's based on the law of effect. Behaviour that results in a pleasant outcome is likely to be repeated, but behaviour that results in an unpleasant outcome is not likely to be presented. So this law of effect was created by Thorndike. And what he said was that we can change behaviour by our environmental circumstances. And in changing the repeated behaviour that we want to reinforce, then we're more likely to change people, regardless of what their individual differences are. Underpinning reinforcement theory is this idea of operant conditioning. So operant conditioning is saying that I can control anyone's behaviour by manipulating the consequence you get for that. Now, we learnt growing up that we couldn't do things because we'd either get whacked by our parents or we would be taken away, so our privileges would be taken away at some point. So what your parents actually did was use operant conditioning to shape who you are today. We use this in organisations the same way. So it's called organisational modification, organisational behaviour modification, and it's the use of operant conditioning to influence human behaviour at work. So if you think about it, positive reinforcement, your organisations will give you money if you turn up to work. And that's a positive behaviour, working, and it's reinforced by a positive outcome, your pay. We can use negative reinforcement. So negative reinforcement strengthens a behaviour by making the avoidance of an undesirable consequence contingent on its occurrence. So basically, if you want me to continue being paid, you'll turn up to work, and if you don't turn up to work, I'm going to dock your pay. So you want to repeat a behaviour to avoid something else. Punishment is where you get a negative reward for the behaviour, so you start to not do it as frequently. And extinction is where we stop you doing it altogether. So if we're looking at this figure, what we tend to find in this example is the supervisor's goal is to improve quality as a part of the total quality management process. Now you can see that our goal is a high quality production output. Now we can do that using individual behaviour in different ways, and we can reinforce it in multiple ways, but we're going to get different outcomes. So we can use all the strategies up there, but we need to know that we're going to get different outcomes. So let's go through this in more detail. Positive reinforcement is central to every manager. It's central to all of our behaviour, let's face it. We are motivated and we're manipulated in one way by the consequences in which we get for our behaviour. So the law of contingent reinforcement states that for a reward to have a maximum reinforcing value, then it must be delivered only if I do the desired behaviour. Whereas the law of immediate reinforcement, which is also important, is that the more immediate you give me my reward for the behaviour that I've given, the more strengthened I am with that relationship, and therefore I'm more likely to do it. So there's no real, question or grey area around A plus B equals C. It's very much, if I do this, I get this reaction. And shaping is this idea that we can change people and the way in which they behave by manipulating these organisational conditions. So we can create a new behaviour by the positive reinforcement of things around it. Punishment eliminates our undesirable behaviour by making an unpleasant consequence for the result of the occurrence. So for example, if I give you a performance management warning for, turning up late to work, you're not likely to turn up late again, hopefully. Unless you don't like the job, but that's a teeny tiny detail. We'll talk about that in class. So ethical issues that come up in this idea of reinforcement is that the question that is most commonly asked is it ethical to control human behaviour? Now there's debates and that goes on forever and ever about whether or not it is ethical to control people's behaviour, but ultimately we do it all the time. Our parents do it to us, our friends do it to us, we do it to other people, but what we need to consider is how ethical some of our rewards will be. So what we really need to think about is, as a manager, are we being fair? And that's really important. So motivation and reinforcement, and I guess remuneration in this circumstance is really important, because we know that pay or remuneration for performance is something that is a need of an organisation or individual. So our employees all have the need for that physiological satisfaction, but it's also a reward. So satisfaction with rewards should lead to increased motivation at work and into the future. Now, if we're looking at this diagram, what we see is that there's an integrated approach to motivation. So it includes individual ability, work effort, organisational support, and that leads to performance accomplishment, and then it leads into rewards for performance. Now let's talk about some of those rewards for performance. So pay for performance is consistent with the equity, expectancy and reinforcement theory. So the notion that paying people for their performance is something that we expect, right? Merit pay, as we mentioned in mini lecture 2, basically awards pay increases based on our performance, right? So if we think that we are worth a certain amount, then we expect to be paid. So it's not always contingent and it's not always equitable. And what we've actually found is that it doesn't always achieve the desired results. In fact, if we're looking at CEO remuneration, there's a whole lot of grey area when it comes down to, does merit pay influence performance? Because there are some examples where it certainly did not. So the other incentive remuneration systems that we can look at are things like pay for knowledge, bonus pay, profit sharing plans, gain sharing plans, and employee share ownership plans. Now, if you go down the HR stream, you will have a whole module and a whole course on this. And we're not going to go into that much detail for this particular course, but it's really important for you to know that there are different ways in which incentive remuneration systems work. And as a result, they're linked to different motivation. And if we know how people are motivated and what's going to motivate them, then what we're going to find is we're going to be able to influence their behaviour. And that's important because remember at the start in Module 1, I said individual employee motivation impacts organisational performance. So being able to influence that relationship is really important. So in this module, what we've really looked at is reinforcement theories. We've looked at how we can actually change the environmental conditions in order to motivate people to perform, which then leads to better performance overall. We've looked at pay for performance, we've looked at incentive remuneration systems, and they're really just examples as to how a manager can actually influence behaviour at work. I hope you've enjoyed the mini lectures and I look forward to seeing you in class or at the next mini lecture.